Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Apprentice. This is a 5-cost action card from Alchemy, and it says, +1 action, trash a card from your hand, +1 card per coin it costs, +2 cards if it has potion in its cost. So Apprentice is what I like to call a cost-relevant trasher, which means that you get a benefit that scales with the cost of the card that you trashed, sort of like Salvager and Remodel. When Apprentice trashes an expensive card, it can give you a huge amount of non-terminal draw. So like consider trashing a gold. This will draw you 6 cards, which is a massive amount of cards. Now, you can still use this to trash zero-cost junk, like your starting coppers and curses, but it's pretty bad at doing that. And you're not forced to gain like estates like you would be with Remodel, and it is non-terminal, but you're not getting anything at all for doing it, and that's, for a 5-cost card to trash 1 card and give you no benefit, is normally pretty bad if that's all you do with it. So if you want to use Apprentice to trash your starting coppers and junk, typically you'd look to try and sort of get your deck reasonably under control before you start doing that. You want to maybe find some other way of drawing cards first, or maybe even you have other apprentices and you've set up an engine to start drawing with them first before you would start considering trashing too many of your coppers to Apprentice, just because you're going to have these really bad turns. Like if you're not drawing any cards and you're just trashing a copper with Apprentice, you haven't really got much else to work with that turn, and in my experience you can just sort of get stuck with just having these really bad turns with Apprentice all the time. It's just a very inefficient way of trashing cards because it costs 5 and it's only trashing 1 thing. So non-terminal draw is normally pretty good compared to terminal draw and comes with a number of benefits. So you don't need villages to support it, and you don't need to worry about drawing the villages alongside it at the right time, like you would do with cards like Smithy. However, Apprentice doesn't really get these benefits. So the problem with Apprentice is that you may want to be continuously gaining cards just to fuel it, right? You don't just get to buy 1 village and then play it every turn. You need to be gaining a card every single turn in order to trash it with Apprentice. And you need to draw Apprentice alongside the card you want to trash anyway. So as far as non-terminal draw goes, Apprentice sort of isn't really getting the same kind of benefits that you would expect from non-terminal draw. The reason why you would have Apprentice is because you can draw a very large amount of cards with it if you trash the right things. And sometimes you will get some additional trashing of your other starting cards as well. So be careful with Apprentice. When you first trash an expensive card, you will draw quite a lot, and then it's very easy to line up another expensive card with another Apprentice, because it's just drawn you so many cards. And because it's non-terminal, it's very easy to just then play another Apprentice, right? As soon as you draw it, you can just play another one. And so what this means is that your deck will suddenly switch on and go from having these bad turns to having these incredibly strong turns where you start drawing everything. But when this happens, you suddenly go from trashing 1 card per turn to suddenly trashing potentially quite a lot of cards every turn. You know, if you had 3 apprentices, suddenly you're losing 3 cards from your deck every turn in order to fuel these massive turns. And Apprentice can very quickly just destroy your entire deck if you are careless with it. You suddenly trash things so quickly and you're just not prepared for that. You're going to have a bad time. Okay, so how many apprentices would you normally want? Well, in my experience, I would say that it's pretty common when an apprentice is around that you could probably just support a single one as a supplement to some other draw engine. Right? So the Apprentice can remove your estates. It's going to get a little bit of draw out of that. It can remove cards that run out of use, like say you bought a moneylender to actually trash your coppers with, and maybe you have some cards that you're okay to lose, like some early silvers, right? So you've got this Apprentice. It's not trashing great things or things that often, but it is going to get you a bunch more draw on the times you do. And it's non-terminal draw, and that's really nice. In the same way, laboratories are a nice supplement to other draw engines. Sometimes you will buy extra copies of Apprentice just because you want to use them to trash the coppers, and then eventually you look to trash those duplicate apprentices to your other apprentices and sort of end up going back down to having one of them, right? It's just this flurry of trash and coppers and then a bunch of apprentices over a couple of turns, and then it just settles down again. But of course, you can use Apprentice as your main form of draw, but if you want to do that, you've really got to decide how in the world are you going to actually fuel your Apprentice engine. That you will need to keep gaining cards solely for the purpose of being trashed to your apprentices, if this is the way that you want to draw your deck every turn. So how heavily you can use Apprentice is going to depend on what is available for you to generate this fuel and how good it is. Most of the time, this is going to involve a gainer of some kind, because buying expensive cards just to trash them for draw is usually pretty hard, because that's a very expensive way of running things and you might not have the money. Like if I'm buying golds manually every turn just to like trash one to an apprentice every turn, that's a lot of money to spend just on the draw. So when you see Apprentice in the Kingdom, it's worth checking. The first thing that I would do is I would say, okay, is there any good support for this to use it for draw? You know, is there a way for me to actually get fuel regularly? Because Apprentice can be very strong in the situations where there is fuel. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of ways that boards can have good fuel for Apprentice. So gold gainers are probably the most common because these are pretty common cards. They show up quite a lot in expansions. And gold is a very expensive card. These gain you 6-cost cards, and those are excellent to trash with Apprentice. So usually when you have a gold gainer, sometimes you will buy it, you will gain a couple of golds, and then you might stop playing it because you actually only want to have so many golds in your deck, and the golds are the stock cards, and you don't want to just flood your deck with a ton of stock cards. But Apprentice is great because if you were going to be doing this anyway, you can keep on playing the gold gainer, and now suddenly you've got a huge amount of draw every turn. Now, instead of just stopping at gaining golds, let's just keep going. Just get more of them and convert them into massive amounts of non-terminal draw. Well, that's excellent, right? Well, I say it's non-terminal draw. The gold gainer itself might be terminal, and you're now going to be playing it more often. But yeah, so this is gold gainers are like the big thing that tends to switch on Apprentice very easily, and there's a huge amount of them. These are just cards down here that we've seen before, Bandit, Courtier, Explorer. I've done videos on them already. They are just ways of gaining a gold every turn. Some cards give you benefits when trashed, and Fortress and Rats are two particular ones from the Dark Ages expansion, because they are basically designed to be fuel for cost-relevant trashers like Apprentice. So Fortress can never go away. When you trash it, it immediately bounces back into your hand, and you still get the benefit of trashing a 4-cost card. So you still get 4 cards from Apprentice, but you won't actually lose the Fortress. And Rats is a card whose only purpose is to trash other things to turn them into rats, and then the rats are designed to be trashed by something else. And they also, when you trash them, they give you an extra card. So you'll draw 5 cards when you trash a rat. So you'll look to convert all of your coppers and estates into rats, and then trash the rats with Apprentice for big draws. And then there are some other cards that can encourage you to gain them and then just look to trash them later. So Silk Merchant is the big one. You want to just keep buying this over and over and then find some way to trash it. And Apprentice is a great way to get the trash benefit and also make use of the fact that it's a 4-cost card. It can be very strong with trashers like Apprentice. There are other examples, but those are the ones that we're just going to go through there. Some cards can be gained very cheaply, and then they become more expensive during your action phase. Or there is a way to very easily replace cheap cards with much more expensive cards. So the classic example is Peddler from Prosperity. You can buy them at a cost of 0, and then during your action phase they actually cost 8. Well, that's a gigantic amount of draw for Apprentice, 8 cards. Right, that's extortionate amounts of draw, and so that's usually the big one for cards like this. Obviously, it's good with other things like Salvager and Remodel, but you can get a lot of draw out of Apprentice from it. Fisherman, sometimes you can. This is just another example. It can go down to costing 2 when you buy it, and then go up to 5. You just need to make sure there's something in your discard pile during your turn to make it more expensive, which you can't always do, to be fair. You want to watch out for cost reduction. So Bridge is a good one with Apprentice. You can make use of cost reduction, buy cards cheaply, and then they become more expensive because you get a lot of control over when you get to play Bridge. But there are some like Canal or Bridge Troll where they will automatically take effect at the start of the turn, or Highway where you might have to play it mid-turn just to keep drawing your deck. And then that reduces the amount of draw that you get from Apprentice. So Bridge is a nice one that can get you a lot of expensive cards on the cheap, but maybe not so much the other forms of cost reduction, although it can work out. And I've just given another example here. Advance, you can buy it for 0 and turn some action card into another action card that costs up to 6. So you might be able to buy 2-cost action cards like Seller, pretty cheap, and then advance them on a future turn into something costing 5 or 6, and then you can trash that later for Apprentice. So it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but sometimes you just have to start thinking creatively about how you're just going to put a load of expensive cards in your deck, and stuff like Advance, it can work. Right, so don't sleep on these things. There are lots and lots of other examples, but these are just a few. Cards that gain from the trash are really good with Apprentice, so this gives you a lot more flexibility over what you can trash with Apprentice. So Lurker, for example, can pick up any action card out of the trash, so you can use Apprentice to trash basically anything that you want in your deck, anything you have that's expensive. Maybe you have other good 5-cost cards like a Sentry, I don't know, that you used earlier, or some form of important payload, and then you can just lurk it back out of the trash after you've finished drawing and still play it on the same turn. So with these, you don't actually have to lose cards out of your deck, but you don't have to try and specifically match up Apprentice with cards that you have been gaining just for the purpose of being trashed. Right? You can trash anything with Apprentice now for some of these and then get it back. So these are good ones to watch out for. These are just some examples: Lurker, Rogue, Grave Robber, of cards that get stuff out of the trash. If you need to, any form of extra gaining will do in order to use Apprentice, but watch out because the cheaper the cards that you gain, the less effective your Apprentices are going to be. So as an example of something that is not very good with Apprentice, let's take a look at noted bad card, Bureaucrat. This gains you silvers. They don't provide you much draw. They only draw you 3 cards when you trash them. But if you consider that you have to draw the Bureaucrat and the silver and the Apprentice all on that turn, that is drawing 3 cards just so you can trash the silver and draw 3 cards. So it actually doesn't earn you any draw overall, right? You are just spinning your wheels at that point. So you really want to be looking for something a little bit more expensive than 3 at least. 5-cost gainers like Artisan and University, they can be good because you always have Apprentices available that you can then gain, and then you can trash them to each other. And that's quite nice because when you just have more Apprentices in your deck, it's easier to draw Apprentice at the right time so you can start using it. So that's normally a prime target for fuel when you've got a way to gain 5-cost cards, just more Apprentices. Okay, so let's say that you don't actually have any way to fuel Apprentices. There's no way to gain cards specifically just to be trashed. Well, Apprentice isn't useless in this case. You can still have some late game utility in order to convert your other engine pieces into draw later on when you don't expect to actually have many more turns. Right? Instead of playing like a village and a patrol, one turn you could trash the patrol and another turn you could trash the village that supports it. And really long term, that's going to be quite bad because you will destroy your deck. But on the particular turns where you're trashing those things, you will actually draw more cards, potentially more easily. Like maybe you had a bad draw. You drew the patrol, but you didn't have a village. Well, you can just get rid of it and think to yourself, well, how many more turns am I going to have? But it's really important, if you're going to look to do this, and before you add the Apprentice to your deck, unless you have it sitting around because like you trashed estates earlier or whatever. Before you start trashing these important cards, you've got to consider how much control do you and your opponent have over ending the game, because you've got to try and figure out, okay, when is this game going to end? Like, how many more turns can it be until someone ends? Like, are we going for provinces and there's 4 left and we can only get 1 per turn? Well, the game's going to have at least 4 more turns left to go, right? Or it could be that things are imminent on a pile out and you could basically end the game at any time all of a sudden. You've really got to time the game properly when using Apprentice in this way, because if you time it poorly and the game goes on longer, your deck will be utterly destroyed and you will potentially not be able to catch up, and your opponent can then just very slowly overtake you and beat you, probably. So this can happen. I've done it before. You really got to watch out. Another thing to have done with Apprentice, and it can be a bit scary, but it can also be a pretty good idea, you can trash really expensive victory cards like Province if you need to. Like, if you trash a Province, that is 8 cards, which is a very, very good draw. Right, these are usually going to be some of the most expensive cards you have in your deck are going to be those powerful victory cards. Now, bear in mind, this is not quite the same as milling provinces like you can do with Remodel and Salvager. This is because trashing the province doesn't now get you an extra province that turn to replace it. So you do actually lose the points from it, right? This is very different from like remodeling a province into a province. But if the alternative is that you had a dud turn, right, and maybe you're in the lead and you can support that point loss. Like, if you are even just 1 point ahead of your turn right now, there is 1 province left in the supply. If trashing a province means drawing your whole deck and buying that last province, you will still end the turn 1 point ahead of your opponent and win. So, just don't be too scared to trash provinces, but obviously take a lot of care with it. That's all I wanted to say. Lastly, we have been missing this final sentence on Apprentice. It can get you extra cards if it has potion in the cost. It'll draw you 2 more. The reason why I didn't really bring it up before now is because this is usually not relevant. It takes a lot of effort to gain potion cost cards, and many of those cards will actually also be providing you draw themselves anyway. So you've got Apothecary, you've got Scrying Pool, you've got Golem slightly to some extent, right? There's a whole bunch of these potion cost cards where you want to keep them around for what they're doing. There are 2 situations I tend to find that I trash potion cost cards to Apprentice. One of them is Familiar. When the curse is run out, it will draw you 5 cards because it's 3 cost and a potion. Another one I've seen is Possession. If you are possessing your opponent, you can trash their possessions because you won't be playing them, and that will draw you 8 cards, which is very significant. But you won't actually see this very often because you probably shouldn't be putting Apprentice in your deck when there is possession around, because it is so much more useful for your opponent when they are controlling your deck than it is for you, right? You don't want to trash your possessions, but your opponent, when they are possessing you, is very happy to trash the possessions and get way better turns out of your deck than you might be able to, and that can be a big problem, so watch out for that. Okay, well, that's all I really had to say on Apprentice. This is a pretty good card, but you really got to think about it. You really got to watch out. There is a real potential for huge reward, but also this card can have absolutely catastrophic consequences if you play it poorly. So what we are going to do now is we are going to head over to the online client, and we are going to generate some random kingdoms with Apprentice in them, and we are going to see what sort of impact it has on the kingdom. So here, there is no gainer. This is a singleton board. There is not even plus buy, and there is like chapel to get really thin really fast. So this is a problem for Apprentice because we can't really support trashing anything. What do we have? We have Wishing Well to guess a card incorrectly and then use that to support Vassal. I don't know if I like Vassal on a deck that's this thin and doesn't have good support. There is Poacher, there is Island, there is Harem, there is Caravan. Like, this is not a very good board. But I still think maybe Chapelling Down will be better. What is my deck going to look like? Right, I can support Poachers fairly easily, I think, because I don't really see the deck, like any piles running. But like the only draw is Wishing Well and Caravan and Apprentice. And they're not great. And it's only one card per turn. So is actually going for like getting thin and building at one card per turn all the way back up, is that actually any good? Maybe I'm better off just going for the trading post and buying like harems and islands and doing a more money-ish strategy. Maybe this might be the very rare chapel skip board, because the board is so weak that I'm actually okay to have my coppers around. Maybe instead of trading post, well, turning some coppers into silvers seems okay, but maybe I just keep the coppers around. I don't know, right? Because Chapel big money loses to big money, basically. So maybe I do get a trading post. I turn some coppers into silvers and I buy like harems and I get some caravans and stuff. Like, maybe that's what I'm doing. Anyway, I think Apprentice is bad here because you can't support it. And you don't really want to be trashing the stuff because gaining is very, very difficult. I don't think I ever add one, not even late. Like, I just think I avoid Apprentice entirely. It's just a bad board for it there. You can't fuel it. Here we have Upgrade as trashing and Apprentice. For draw, we have Courtyard and Apprentice. But the only villages are Native Village and Fishing Village. And while Native Village is not quite a stop card village, it sort of is. And that's not great for Courtyard, because Courtyard actually only draws you 2. So outside of Apprentice, it is pretty difficult on this board to actually increase your hand size. And there's Militia to keep it low. And there is no gainer again, except Bureaucrat. And I did say that Bureaucrat was pretty bad for Apprentice. It doesn't actually increase your hand size. So there's no way to really draw here. So does that mean, is Courtyard money still good when you are faced with a Militia onslaught? Like, probably not. I actually don't want the coppers because I need to get a good chance of high value treasures in my hand, because Militia is so good. Like, I think you really want to be playing Militia, so you open Militia. It sort of crushes a lot of stuff. The alternative is there's actually Philosopher's Stone, but the only way to get extra gains is Bureaucrat. And Bureaucrat Philosopher's Stone does not sound very good to me. But, there's Militia, potentially. You can buff it up a little bit, but surely not, right? Surely there's not enough going on for Philosopher's Stone to be good. You can't get enough gains, is the problem. Like, I don't think it's worthwhile going Philosopher's Stone with Bureaucrat over just, like, trying to buy golds, honestly. Man, there's merchant shit. I'm not sure how much I bother going for villages. Well, here's another thing. You can use Native Village as a pseudo trasher, but that doesn't actually help Philosopher's Stone, so the fact that you keep the cards doesn't matter, because they're not in your deck or your discard pile. Okay, scratch that. I said there was no way to increase your hand size, but of course there is stacking stuff on Native Villages across multiple turns and then exploding them all at once into your hand. Not exploding them, putting them into your hand all at once for a sudden big hand size, but there's no buys anyway, so what are you going to use that for? I am not sure how to play this, but again, I think this is a pretty bad board for Apprentice because there's no gains, and it's just pretty difficult. Like, you don't really want to be buying golds just to trash them to Apprentice. I really want to keep the golds so that when I get militiaed, I might actually have a decent turn. So I think there's Courtyard and Militia. And yeah, that's probably it, really, and big money otherwise. So it's pretty sad. Maybe I get an upgrade and I do thin some of the coppers out. So, oh well. That's just unfortunate boards for Apprentice here. Okay, so game number 3. We have Remodel and a Salvager and Apprentice. So lots and lots of cost-relevant trashes. And we've got Steward as well, so we have a lot of trashing here. Steward is the only real thinner, I guess. Like, it's a pretty good one at that. There is no village, unfortunately. There is market, so there is plus buy this time, and there's pawn as well. But what are you gonna do? Like, merchantship is terrible, as always. Militia, again, seems pretty good. The only draw is Apprentice and Courtyard, and there's no village. So this is just real nasty. There is market for plus buy, but you don't really want to be doing stuff like buying pawns just to trash them to Apprentice. That doesn't make sense. So there is Salvager for plus buy, but it's not real plus buy, right? So what do you do? I think you get thin with Steward to trash your coppers and your estates. You get a militia. Maybe it's fine to have both of these as your opening, and then you get some silvers. And then you're just trying to shift into playing a bunch of markets, I guess. Like, under the militia onslaught, like, market is the only thing that's really going on here. I just don't like Apprentice. Yeah, like, even if you buy a load of markets, you don't really want to be trashing the markets, even though you can get quite a lot of draw out of that. So we just want markets and probably golds, to be honest. Do we get a remodel late if we're going to be buying some golds? Maybe. Like, we can consider that. Maybe just one remodel. But yeah, so this is another unfortunate, not very good for Apprentice board, because it's so hard to gain fuel. There's only like Bureaucrat, and again, Bureaucrat is just no good for Apprentice. It's not actually drawing you. Well, here is Possession on the board with Apprentice. I said, oh, that's bad, right? Don't use Apprentice with Possession, so it's not looking good. We have no village again. We have Courtier, Minion, Torturer, Militia. Oh, so many awful attacks. But attacks are nice to some extent in that maybe if you're being possessed, your opponent doesn't want to play the attacks. Well, maybe not. Maybe they don't care. We also have Trading Post and Remodel and Money Lender to get thin. There is Vineyard. So we do have plus gains with Courtier, and there is a gold gainer. So actually, like, you could use Apprentice to draw, given that you can't play a Torturer engine because there's no village. And what's Minion going to do? Well, there's no other non-terminal card except for Courtier and Apprentice, so we're probably not doing that. And Possession actually isn't very good here because there is no village. Right, one of the main reasons to play Possession doesn't work here, so it's hard to do single possession, I guess. You really want a village with it to get multiple turns. So I think I open Money Lender to get rid of the coppers, and then what am I doing? Is it really just a minion stack? Like, is that all you can actually do in this kingdom? But what are you going to do with the minion? Well, you can play Courtier. You know what? Minion, Courtier, that's pretty good. You can reveal Courtier to minions to get coins and buys or plus action. Right, plus action 3 coins and other minions. And you can get up to province. I don't know if you're really going to be getting Vineyard. It is hard to play potions in a minion stack because minion really doesn't like treasures. So yeah, so I think I open Money Lender and silver, I guess. There's no other 3. And I'm going to get up to minions, and I'm going to buy minions, and I'm going to thin my coppers, and I'm going to get some courtiers, and I'm just going to look to buy maybe a province per turn. Maybe depending on how much I win the minion split and get courtiers, I might be able to play some for plus buy. But that's pretty much all I'm doing. So again, a poor Apprentice gets left in the dust here. And I don't think I actually care that much for Militia, because I'd rather open Money Lender, and Minion doesn't really care if you get hit by Militia, so it's already a discard attack. So yeah, it's just a Minion stack, and this has gone really badly for Apprentice. It's quite funny. These boards really do not want Apprentice, because they're just no good at gaining stuff. So we've gone like 0 out of 4 games, which is not what I was expecting. Okay, so here is the last game. So, we have Council Room and Wharf as draw that has plus buys. We've got Native Village as a village. We've got Bandit as a gold gainer. We've got Sentry as a trasher to get rid of the coppers and estates as well. So we've got a pretty good engine going on. Wharf is one of the best draw cards, but there's also Torturer as well. So you can potentially... Would you rather do the Torturer? Well, here's the thing. Sentry doesn't like Torturer because the curses go into your hand. You don't actually want the curses to go into your hand. So that's nice. So Native Village, it's really easy to get a load of them with like wharves and council rooms as well. So I really want to be building up to that. So I definitely want to do everything I can to get to Sentry first. So I'm probably opening... Do I even just go double silver over Caravan? I'm not sure how useful Caravan is here, but I'll happily have some. But I think, well, maybe it's fine. Maybe Caravan silver works out. It's either that or double silver. I want to get a Sentry or 2. I want to then start picking up Native Villages and Wharves. I think, actually, you don't bother with Torturer here. Like, the attack is not that worrying, and I really want the plus buy with Wharf, but I can buy an Apprentice in order to trash the curses from my hand. Right, that's one major benefit that it has over Sentry. I want the Sentry first, but then I can turn it towards Apprentice and use it to trash curses from my hand if my opponent gets a Torturer. Outside of that, is Apprentice useful? Well, there is Bandit as a gold gainer, but the problem is that I probably want to be actually playing the golds because I've got such a good draw engine with Wharf. Even though Native Village is not necessarily the best village for it, it's still fine, right? It's not actually a stock card, so it's a bit better than I think. So yeah, so crazy Wharf engine. Maybe the Wharf engine is good enough that I don't need Apprentice, but honestly, like Apprentice, I can probably stick an Apprentice in my deck and it's fine. At some point, if I get the Bandit and I get enough of them, might actually be slightly difficult to carry on drawing all my deck. Like, I really want to be buying a lot of Wharves, a lot of villages. I'm going to have a lot of money of golds to support that and fuel buying a load. I think I could easily see me slotting in an Apprentice into my deck at some point, maybe. If my opponent gets a Torturer, then I'm definitely going to grab an Apprentice, but Sentry is the primary trasher. So Apprentice probably okay here. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't buy it, but I think you can definitely find some use for it. But gaining cards, like, you got to buy them, so you don't really want to trash them, with the exception of golds, but you actually want to use the golds for money because you've got such good draw, you can actually support a lot of golds. So yeah, so maybe it's just another sad board for Apprentice. So that was 5 random kingdoms, and poor old Apprentice did really badly out of this roll. Gaining cards gets a lot better in future expansions, like engines get better, it's a lot easier to gain a whole bunch of stuff. And so I think Apprentice will slowly start to fare a lot better as we look forward into future sets. But for now, Apprentice, I think it's all right as a card. It's not the strongest thing. It's got that trade-off. It makes for interesting games, which is important, but it's not necessarily the strongest thing. Right? There's usually plenty of draw cards around and plenty of other trash cards around, and Apprentice does both, but you know, it's got some real downsides attached, so sometimes you just stick with the more regular stuff and you leave Apprentice alone. But otherwise, it's a pretty cool card. So yeah, just think carefully about it before you use it. Anyway, that was Apprentice. I hope that was useful for you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.